Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. If you enjoy this video, we invite those of you who haven't yet done so, to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click the notification icon, to be notified when the next one is uploaded. We'd also like to urge those of you who haven't yet done so, to sign our online petition for an inquiry into the BBC and Channel 4's coverage of Lewis Hamilton and Abu Dhabi. A link has been provided in the description. If you are on X, then please repost our tweet. Thank you. At the end of last month, the BBC published the independent report that it had commissioned into the abuses of power in its workplace in the wake of the Hugh Edwards sexual misconduct scandal. Expectedly, the review concluded that the BBC does not have a toxic culture, and found that the majority of people working there enjoy their work and uphold its values. Critically, it found that there are still examples of workplace misconduct by a minority, with damaging impacts for the whole BBC. Interestingly, the response from one Karishma Patel writing for The Independent was that the BBC does have a toxic culture and have fostered an environment of silence and fear. This is a picture that resonates with us and likely many others who have been highlighting the abuse of power that led to the BBC spreading fake news about Abu Dhabi 2021 and systemically denigrating Lewis Hamilton while promoting Max Verstappen on a platform of lies and falsehoods. This is something that can only happen in a toxic culture that fosters an environment of silence and fear. Those involved know that they are lying and systemically denigrating Hamilton for the benefit of Verstappen, while those that may be disturbed by what is going on are too scared to speak out. Well, as scandal after scandal and review after review has shown, there is always a tipping point, or watershed moment when the scandal bursts wide open. And, it would appear that the day of reckoning is fast approaching for the BBC with regard to Lewis Hamilton and Abu Dhabi. Ironically, this is largely due to the fact that in 2021, the BBC had inadvertently introduced a policy which effectively set a timeline or deadline for exposing their cover-up of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix results later that year. To recall, in the immediate aftermath of the race, while public outrage was still raging, and Toto Wolff had yet to drop the appeal, the BBC and Sky led the worldwide media effort to gaslight the robbery, by claiming that the rules allowed Marcy to engineer the result like he did. And we also know, like our man James at Fixed has been saying, that the BBC and Andrew Benson routinely gas up Max Verstappen and denigrate Lewis Hamilton. As the world's supposedly most trusted and biggest news source, the BBC was so critical to the efforts to gaslight the robbery that they used their supposedly trusted news platform to spread the fake news that Marcy was entitled to rig the race. Within a few hours of the outrageous robbery, they had put together a series of clips to be broadcast on their news platform suggesting that there was indeed genuine confusion about whether Marcy had acted within the rules. Of course, this was an age-old ploy that has been used to spread propaganda throughout the ages. When you argue both sides of the truth and the lie and pretend that you are unable to tell the difference, you are in effect propping up the lie and undermining the truth. This was what the BBC did in their flagship Explainer series video presented by Roz Atkins. The video titled, Roz Atkins on the Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen F1 title drama, sought to explain the controversy, but what it really did was gaslight the robbery by enabling blatant lies from known pro-Max and anti-Lewis commentators like David Coulthard and the late Eddie Jordan, ably supported by the Beeb's own Andrew Benson. Here are some clips for your attention.
But this story had only just begun. On the first lap, Hamilton took the lead. Then, as Verstappen tried to overtake, Hamilton left the track, cut a corner and stayed in front. After which, race director Michael Marcy decided Hamilton could keep the lead. Former F1 team owner Eddie Jordan was unimpressed.
For me, Marcy was wrong. He should have asked Lewis to give back the place because Lewis ran off the road and he took a fair advantage as a result.
But Hamilton stayed put. The F1 Twitter account told us we're into the second half of our title decider and it's looking good for Lewis Hamilton. And so it was. The race was 58 laps and Hamilton's lead was over 10 seconds. Soon we heard from Red Bull's team principal, Christian Horner. He told Sky Sports, "We're going to need a miracle in these last 10 laps to turn it around. He needs some luck from the racing gods." And with 5 laps to go, that luck arrived for Max Verstappen.
They brought Jordan on to claim that Marcy had been wrong when he ruled as he was allowed to, that Hamilton was not required to give up position following a first corner incident between the two championship rivals. This was in effect setting up the false narrative that the lawful decision at the start that Verstappen supporters disagreed with was somehow balanced out by the unlawful decision in the final stages of the race, which robbed Hamilton of a certain victory that was then gifted to Verstappen. They brought Coulthard out to make the outrageously false claim that there was a rule which allowed Marcy to do what he did. There was no such rule, and critically, for the policy on upholding editorial standards with fair and accurate reporting, the BBC will have to account for this when the issue is eventually addressed.
And David Coulthard offered this explanation.
And the sporting regulations are hugely complex as well. And the sequence of events of only allowing 5 cars to overtake Lewis before the safety car came in is not something that typically has happened before.
So if David Coulthard says that, does that mean the race director was wrong? Not necessarily.
The FIA do have another rule which allows the race director to override that and make the decision he feels is correct.
Which leads us to BBC Sports F1 correspondent Andrew Benson's conclusion that the sporting regulations do not cover this specific situation. Certainly there's plenty of comfort for Formula One as it navigates this controversy. This was high-octane drama which demanded the world's attention in a way many sports can only dream of.
It is clear that this was a put-up job by the BBC which undermines any assertion that it holds itself to a high editorial standard and is against the spreading of fake news. Given that Hamilton is the only black driver in Formula One, it is easy to jump to the conclusion that his robbery was racially motivated. However, the BBC's self-proclaimed desire to become the industry's gold standard for workplace diversity and inclusion sits oddly with its central role in the demonization of the only black driver in Formula One. At first glance, one would not expect the self-proclaimed champion of diversity like the BBC to be involved in undermining a black champion of diversity like Sir Lewis. But if you take a closer look like we have done, you will find that all of the BBC staff that we have been able to link to their F1 coverage are white. Yes, folks, it would appear that every member of the F1 section of the self-proclaimed champion of diversity that the BBC aspires to be is white, and they have all been involved in the demonization of the black champion of diversity. So, you can see how they can tell themselves that it is what it is, as they bow down to John Malone. But here's the thing, back in 2021, the BBC set itself a target to achieve a workforce balance of 50-20-12 by 2026. That is to say 50% women, 20% non-white and 12% disabled. Tellingly, the F1 stats are at present 66.67% men and 33.3% women who are all white. It is instructive that despite boasting a workforce that is 17% non-white in 2024, there is not a single non-white person connected to Formula One, even as the BBC routinely report on Sir Lewis's high-profile campaigns for increased diversity in motorsport. So, they have some shifting to do to bring the F1 section up to scratch, either before or after 2026. Now, the editorial policy also provided a confidential mechanism for whistleblowing for those staff and freelancers who may wish to raise concerns about editorial issues. So, how long before someone in the mold of Karishma Patel, or our dear James, becomes involved with the BBC's F1 coverage? This won't be the first or last time that some dastardly deed that the BBC thought was dead and buried resurfaces to heap serious reputational damage when the perpetrators are no longer around to keep it buried. Forza Ferrari.